It's not a war anymore. Whatever it was, however history might dress it up in uniforms and flags and think tanks, it's over. There are no battles, there are no fronts. There is no resistance large enough to call it a war. There is only an army with drones and tanks and phosphorus, and a population of starving families locked inside a strip of land so small you could walk its length before sundown. This is not a war. This is the murder of children while the world watches and refreshes Twitter. This is the sound of babies dying behind censored screens. This is a tragedy where the soundtrack is silence. Gaza's in ruins. There is a woman boiling weeds to feed her son who hasn't spoken in days, a child who dreams in color but wakes up to ashes. There's a boy wandering barefoot through craters dragging a plastic bag filled with bread so stale it could chip teeth. There's a doctor who has run out of morphine, performing amputations by flashlight with nothing but rags and prayers. There are aid workers whose bodies were pulled from the convoy, burned, twisted, the white lettering of UN still visible on the roof of the vehicle that was supposed to protect them. And there are children. Doctors say they have never seen so many infants with bullet wounds to the head, toddlers who arrived at makeshift emergency rooms with the backs of their skulls blown out. The lucky ones die instantly, the unlucky ones linger for hours. Their parents screaming into the dark, they bury them in parks and playgrounds and shallow graves marked with plastic forks because the cemeteries are full. A mother cradles a body that won't grow old while a father digs with his hands because the shovels have run out long ago and still the bombs fall. The Israeli government says this is self-defense, but the babies did not attack anyone. They were born behind fences, in a land without clean water where they were already starving before the siege. They were born stateless, voiceless, and now they are dying in silence. There is no war. There is only cruelty. There is only empire. There is only the cold arithmetic of death written in Pentagon ink and broadcast with sanitized language. The world says Israel has a right to defend itself. Against what? Against the babies with plastic toys and sunken eyes, against the men carrying the bodies of their mothers through rubble, against hunger. If this is a war, then what does peace look like? A silence so thorough it swallows even the memory of who once lived here? And maybe that's the plan, to make it so quiet, so empty, so flattened and still that no one remembers the laughter of Palestinian children or the smell of their mother's lentils on Friday afternoons. To make ghosts of the living and myths of the dead, to erase the evidence of their humanity until we forget they were ever here at all. But I remember, and now so do you. And what follows that knock at the door, that haunting silence, the long memory of Gaza, the land where the graveyards are dug by children and the cemeteries are layered with both the dead and the dreams of the living. This didn't start in October. You don't build a prison overnight, and you don't raise a generation to believe another is subhuman unless you plan to do something with that belief. Gaza's been under blockade since 2007. That's 17 years of siege. 17 years of lights going out like every 2 hours, like a punishment. 17 years of parents choosing which child eats and which child goes hungry. 17 years of polluted water and electricity for 2 hours a day, of denied medical permits, of watching the rest of the world live while you count each minute like it's a grain of sand in a broken hourglass. It's not a city, it's a slow kill zone. And it's not survival, it's cruelty scripted into policy. And before that, the Nakba, the catastrophe, 1948, the beginning of the Israeli state and the end of 750,000 Palestinian lives as they knew them. Villages erased, olive groves bulldozed, mosques turned to museums, entire families forced out at gunpoint, keys still hang around the necks of survivors, rusted reminders of homes that no longer exist. But even before the Nakba, the plot was laid, long before the rockets, before the blockades, before the slogans and sirens. The foundation was poured in the 18th and 19th centuries, when European powers began to imagine carving up the Middle East to serve their geopolitical desires. In Britain, imperialists sought not to expand territory, but to plant ideological flags in strategic soil. By the mid-1800s, Protestant dispensationalist movements in Europe had grafted religious prophecy onto colonial ambition. They promoted the idea that the Jews must return to Palestine as a prelude to the end times, not for the Jewish people's sake, but as chess pieces in an apocalyptic design. The Balfour Declaration of 1917 was not a love letter to Judaism. It was a policy crafted by colonial administrators to install a loyal Western outpost in the Arab world, under the guise of divine fulfillment. The U.S. picked up the torch in the 20th century and ran like hell with it. By the time World War II ended and Israel declared itself a state in 1948, Americans, especially American evangelicals, had been primed to believe that Israel's existence wasn't just justified, but sacred. Politicians learned quickly that support for Israel could be wrapped in religious fervor and delivered to the electorate like communion. It was no accident. It was a campaign. Through pulpits, pamphlets, and eventually policy think tanks, American leaders equated criticism of Israel with heresy. It didn't matter if the U.S. was arming an apartheid regime, building military bases, or vetoing every UN resolution demanding justice. The American people had been sold a story. Israel is the will of God, and we are its supporters. And what has that meant for foreign policy? It has meant blank checks and blind eyes. It has meant destabilization across the Middle East, from Lebanon to Iraq to Syria. It has meant generations of Arab and Muslim people growing up watching the United States fund their oppression and call it peacekeeping. It has meant every Palestinian child bombed is paid for by your taxes. Every bullet, every airstrike, every goddamn hospital destroyed. It has meant that truth is treason, that justice is unpatriotic, that to say what is plainly happening, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, genocide, is to be cast out as a radical. To say simply that they are people is to risk exile. It has meant that we cannot see the truth because we are too wrapped up in a story that is never real to begin with, a myth so comfortable we're willing to bleed others for it. This is an actual ancient history. It's happening right now. And when you close your eyes tonight, remember that someone across the world will not wake up at all. Their name will not be spoken on the evening news. Their death will not shift policy or move markets, but they had a favorite color. They had a story that's half told, a family that's now undone, and they died because the world mistook power for justice and silence for diplomacy. This is the grave we are digging. Not just for Gaza, but for our own collective soul. We cannot bury the truth alongside them. We have to dig it up. We have to scream it out loud. And if you wonder how such horror sustains itself, how the killing doesn't collapse under the weight of its own shame, you must understand the machine behind it. The gears of hate, rusted with propaganda and oiled with denial, spin without rest. You cannot bomb a people unless you've convinced your country they are not people. Israel has spent decades dehumanizing Palestinians in textbooks and television, in casual bureaucratic language of occupation. Terrorist is the default setting. The Palestinian child with a rocket is a threat. The Palestinian grandmother with a keffiyeh is a liability. They are taught that Gaza is not a neighbor, but a nest, a threat, a disease. This is not new. Every regime that commits genocide teaches itself to look away, teaches itself to forget that the bodies in the rubble once played soccer or learned how to spell or dreamed of growing up. When your government tells you day after day that the people across the wall are cockroaches, eventually you stop hearing the cries. And when the bombs start falling, you cheer. But this machinery doesn't run without fuel.